It's always so much fun when you haven't seen people for a while. We get so excited and start talking to one another, and away we go. So, welcome. Welcome to Humber. Welcome to the BCTI, which is our Center for Technological Innovation. And one of the things we like to remind people, especially in this context, is when you have any increase in technological innovation, you also need a shift in meaning. So ACER is all about taking a look at what meaning needs to be changed when you're dealing with aging in community over a lifespan, because aging is birth to death, right? It's not just something that's an age. So again, welcome. I'm Ginger Grant. I'm the Dean of Research and Innovation here. And this is one of our projects that we are passionate about, we love doing, and we have a lot of very interested faculty who are joining us in applied research in this area. So just to remind you that we also have a virtual crowd that are coming from around the world that are coming in virtually. So to address those, welcome as well, of all time zones. And for those of you that are in the middle of the night, thank you. This will also be recorded, so you can come back to it and watch it as many times as you want. So, as part of our obligation to recognize our elders, so I am an uninvited settler on these lands. My people come from Northern Scotland and the Isle of Skye, which is way north, and I recognize their many teachings because they form part of who I am. And I would like to honor all of the elders, especially on these lands, so we do what's called a land acknowledgement. So Humber College is located within the traditional and treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, known as the Dobigok, the place of the alders, in Mississaugan language. The region is uniquely situated along Humber River watershed, which historically provided an integral connection for Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Wendat peoples between Ontario Lakeshore and Lake Simcoe and Georgian Bay. Now home to people of numerous nations, Dobigok continues to provide a vital source of interconnection for all of us. So, a reminder, we're live streaming this event, and there will be a Q&A after Bradley speaks. So please turn off your cell phones. And for those of you hiding in the back, please move up. You were well trained in school, right? So what is ACER? So this is something that we have started here. This is a hub and spoke model of research. So any of these outliers that you see, like community connections, there can be hundreds of research projects in each of those spokes. The hub will be the part where we pull all of it together and then work towards disseminating that information across the country, across our, across everywhere, because we can put it on YouTube as well as put it into our classrooms. So we're trying to provide as much as possible to all of our students the experience of working with the community to develop new ways of looking at things. And because we reach out and get experts, one of my favorites, who wrote a fabulous book, Super Age, is Bradley Sherman. So I would like to introduce him to you, and I'll turn it over to Bradley and have fun.
Thank you. A very good morning to you here in Toronto, Mississauga. Did I pronounce that right? Mississauga, I'm sorry. I'm Bradley Sherman, and to everyone who's dialed in today, I appreciate you making the time to have this conversation about designing for demographic resilience. I think we all know the world has changed. We can feel it when we wake up in the morning, when we go out to eat at night at a restaurant, or maybe when we visit a park. Something dynamic is happening right now. And what's happening is our populations are changing, and they're changing at a pretty rapid pace. And we need to adjust accordingly. So starting today, I'd like to give you a quick overview of what's actually happening from the data. because these are data-driven conversations. And I can tell you a story all day long. My people are from Scotland as well. Not as far north as Skye, but they came from that region north of Glasgow. We can tell these stories, but they have to connect back to data, because the data component of this, both in terms of the population numbers and the economic impact, are the only things that are going to move public policymakers and businesses, more importantly. Until they see these, they're not going to understand the dramatic change that we're going through as nations around the world. And make no mistake, this is a global phenomenon. Here's what's happening. Our world is getting older, and it's getting older very, very fast. Worldwide, birth rates are collapsing. This is not hyperbole. This is not me shouting from the rooftops. This is pure data analysis. In countries like Canada and the United States, our birth rates fell below replacement rate about a decade ago. That means that the native-born population is not producing enough children to sustain the population of the country, much less grow it. Now, in Canada and the US, we're in a great position because we welcome immigrants. We welcome people from all around the world. That is our strength. That is also what helps us grow as countries. So Canada and the United States are still seeing population growth. We'll still see economic growth, but at the same time, we're still aging as societies. So I like to say there are only two types of countries today in this world. There are those countries that are aging and growing, like ours, and there are those countries that are aging and shrinking. And believe it or not, there are more countries that are aging and shrinking than you'd expect. Big economies, Japan, Korea, China have all lost population. Germany, Italy as well. And because of this, that pressure on those countries is forcing them to adapt to demographic change at a faster rate than us. This is both good news and bad news for our economies. The good news is we've got all these cases out there now that we can pick and choose from. We can go out there and say, what are you doing in China to adapt for demographic change? We can translate those to a Canadian context. But regardless of how you look at it, Canada, like the United States, is getting old. Perhaps a more daunting statistic is that our population is declining too worldwide. This is population growth rate. We're still in a positive position right now, seeing about 1% growth worldwide. But the UN predicts that by the end of this decade, by 2086, and this is a hyper-conservative number, hyper-conservative, does that stick? Yeah. Hyper-conservative number. By 2086, the global population will go in reverse. We'll stop growing as a global population. Now, I think the UN's numbers are false. They're based on old models that don't take into account rapid decline of birth rates and rapid aging of populations. More conceivably, we're looking at populations reversing worldwide as early as the 2050s. We will all be alive for that. So we're living through this period of change together, and that means we have to adapt together to it if we expect our economies to continue to grow, if we expect there to be greater levels of inclusion for the future. Now, I always like to point out the bad stuff before we get into the good stuff. There are significant risks of not doing anything, significant risks. The biggest one that both of our nations are facing right now are labor shortages. We've all heard about quiet quitting. We all know about the Great Resignation. We all know about the great negotiation that's happening right now between employers and employees. This doesn't go away anytime soon. And there are only a handful of options that countries and businesses can leverage to expand the labor pool. One, of course, is immigration. We've already discussed that. The other is extending the working lives of older adults. Great option. Not many people take it up. And the third is that we can leverage technology. Everyone loves technology, especially if you're business. But guess what? Computers, artificial intelligence, they don't buy goods, they don't pay taxes. So consumer spending will slow because there'll just be fewer people buying goods and services if we don't expand the pool. The tax base will erode because there are more people taking up services than those people paying into the services. we'll see social welfare programs collapse. This is the scary part, especially in a country like Canada that really values its social welfare system. Now, I know your pension system is in far better shape than ours in the US, but by the end of this decade, the Social Security system in the US runs out of money. Now, people won't stop getting checks. Their checks will just be 25% smaller. Just 25%. If you're in a fixed income, that is a huge hit to your monthly spend. And of course, when the Medicare money runs out in the US, the cost of healthcare for older adults will go up as well. This is a double whammy. This is a double whammy. What is often overlooked is that when this happens, when this mismatch occurs, too many people out of work, too few people in, the credit rating for a country actually downgrades. This is the same like consumer credit. You have a high credit score, you can buy whatever you want, as long as you keep paying it back, you can increase your wealth by spending money. Credit ratings are used to build things like roads and bridges and train tracks and factories to some degree. If the credit rating downgrades because of an imbalance in this dependency ratio, guess what? We can't build those things anymore. Or not build them at the same price as we got before. It gets quite expensive to do. And then, of course, infrastructure deteriorates. So some people refer to this, and I'm one of them, as the demographic death spiral. Ouch. It hurts to hear that. But it is a reality, a possible reality for us if we do nothing. The good news is, for those of us in Canada and the US, we can win the future if we take advantage of this period of change right now. We do this by analyzing the demographic data that we have. Let's be honest about our numbers, both domestically and internationally. We need to track what's happening, and this is what I do at my company, Human Change, analyzing emerging taste trends and technologies. And then reference historical examples wherever we can to see how we can move forward in this period that is really disruptive by any single measure. And then develop accurate strategic foresight predictions. What could the future look like if we take this action or that action or an entire buffet of actions or do nothing at all? And then we build winning strategies. And we work across different industries, both private sector and public sector. We've just started some project work with the state of Maryland, one of the 50 US states just outside of the District of Columbia. Their governor has actually made a call, a legislative call for Maryland to become the first longevity-ready state in the country. So this is not just some backroom conversation anymore. This is rising up to the top level in the halls of power. And government is starting to take notice, but business is too. Every business needs to know that this is good for their bottom line. They're not going to move on it otherwise. Businesses are not here for your feelings. They're not here to make you feel good about yourself. They really don't even love to pay you. But they do it because they have to. It's a trade-off. You give them labor, they give you a salary and benefits accordingly. But businesses really need to understand the case behind this for them to move, because who are they responsible to at the end of the day? Shareholders. Shareholders, that is the only group of people, if you're a publicly traded company, that you are responsible to as a business leader. Shareholders. So anything they're doing right now isn't because they feel good about it. Those ESG goals, they are great on paper. They're to make profit. I'm sure that sounds entirely cynical, but if you find me a business that's going to spend more money than they make, you're finding a business that's going to fail, unless they're making it up somewhere else, which is rare. Businesses are being forced right now to make this change. Now, some have already adjusted. These are stats from the US Department of Labor, but they highlight, because we're similar in some respects to Canada in this regard, they highlight the significant jump in workforce participation rates of older adults. Older adults over 75 will likely double in a decade in the US. Those over 65 will roughly grow by about 30%. But I think probably the most important thing to note here is that the 16 to 24 is actually shrink. Long-term change is happening because we've had fewer kids. So in the US, there are only 69 million Gen Zs. That's it. There were 76 million boomers. That's a big gap between the two. We've also been confronted in the US with this additional challenge. You had the similar experience here in Canada during the COVID years, during the pandemic years, of an excess number of people leaving the workforce, heading to retirement. We lost 3 million more than expected. We were hit by a double whammy in the States because the economy is literally on fire right now. We have not had an economy this good in decades, maybe half a century. So we've lost another 3 million people that we weren't expecting to leave because the retirement portfolios look so good. So businesses are really scrambling now to make the change they need to, not only to recruit new workers, because the first priority is always to get the young people in, but the second priority really now is how do you retain older workers as well? And they're starting to make some moves, which we'll get to. One of the things that they're noticing because of advocacy by big organizations like the World Economic Forum and the OECD and AARP is that generational diversity actually builds stronger organizations. Now, I think we should know this intrinsically, right? Diversity on race, gender, sexual identification, gender identification have all contributed to more productive workplaces when managed well. But age is something that's been left on the sidelines. Yet, consistently across the board, just by doing it right, you're not going to lose any money. And if you do it really well, you actually increase your profitability. That's cool. That's cool. And businesses get this. A growing number of businesses get this. But to get there, you obviously have to think about what your motivations are. Now, if your motivations align with any of these, knowledge sharing, creativity, diversity of skills, learning opportunities, adaptability and flexibility, all of these things here actually contribute to a stronger enterprise. And if you increase your generational diversity, if you retain those workers for longer periods of time, recruit those that may be out of work or transition into retirement or some type of hybrid model of work, you can attain all of these. You can attain all of these. But doing that requires us to think differently about how we approach the workplace. The cascading effect not only impacts the business itself, which is pretty phenomenal, by improving things like organizational efficiency, but it also allows us to develop innovative and inclusive approaches. And we've seen this consistently throughout the inclusion conversation, at least in the States, that started in the mid-century with the inclusion of people of color in the workforce, followed by women, followed by LGBT, followed by individuals that are identifying as trans or non-binary. Every time we do this, companies improve. Because we're thinking about products differently too. We're thinking about doing work differently too. And if we just stay in our monocultural, monogendered lane, monoracial lane, we are blinded by the opportunities that actually exist. Not easy. Not easy to do this. Anyone thinks that it is, I'm telling you it's not, but the outcomes tend to outweigh the expense of both time and energy. Ideally for a country, this also expands our economy. This is a big one for national leaders because right now we have a dwindling pool of people who are active workers and active consumers. And plenty of people will say, well, Brad, I know the data. People who are retired actually spend a lot of money. I've looked at the longevity economy research. I've seen it. That's $8.3 trillion in the United States, $15 trillion worldwide. I know older people are spending money. Yes, they are, until about 74. And then their spending goes off a cliff. Typically, the rule is that you spend at or above what you were during your earning years for about 5 to 10 years post-retirement. And then reality kicks in. And no one has pinpointed how that reality does actually kick in. Maybe it's a health episode. Maybe it's just a shifting mentality about your place in the life course. But typically around 74, that spending dives, really dives, because typically people are retiring around 65, 62, 65 years old. So what we want to do to expand that is to keep people working for a bit longer. And that, of course, has that cascading effect. Improving organizational efficiency, developing inclusive products and services, expanding the economy, but also lowering the burden on social welfare programs. This is a huge win for government if they can get it. But the one thing that people also miss is that by staying in work longer, at least engaged, you actually improve your individual health, both your financial health, no surprise, more money in, but also your physical and mental health. This is pretty consistent across the board. Of course, there are exceptions to every rule. There are certain industries that just become harder to do the longer you're alive. Physical, demanding industries are ones that are typically ones that tend to lose out on this demographic dividend, tapping into the power of older adults. But as we'll talk a little bit later on, we're seeing even heavy industry adapting to this right now because they have to. They have to. It's in their best interests. It impacts their bottom line. So let's talk about inclusive design at work. I'm going to talk about four primary areas here, four primary areas that every business really needs to consider, every business really needs to leverage if they're going to get this right, because there are plenty of businesses that have got this wrong. Now, I don't fault them for trying. Never fault any organization for giving it the old college try. Never do that. This is a new period for us. We've never had this many older adults alive. We perhaps never will again. And it requires us all to think a little bit differently about how we approach things. So maybe a little chuckle for you. Is this a chicken or an egg situation? What do we really start with here as we're an enterprise? Do we start with the physical environment? Do we start with the benefits? Do we start with the salary? Do we start with the training? What about the recruiting? There's no guaranteed place to start that's right. The data does not suggest that. What is suggested is that by indicating to these indicating as a company that you're committed to inclusion goals, you're actually going to see immediate results in terms of your retention, your recruitment too. Believe it or not, this actually does go to the recruitment of younger workers as well, but also in the overall health of the enterprise. I'm going to start with inclusive benefits because this is a pretty light lift for organizations. And you'll say, oh, come on, Brad, this can't be a light lift for organizations. It is relatively light. Across all of these four verticals, though, this is probably the one thing I want you to take away from today, especially if you're a business leader working in HR, et cetera. The one thing you have to do as a business leader is ask your employees. You have to talk to your employees. That is the number one thing you have to do. And if you remember that and hit that mantra over and over again, having honest conversations with your employees about what they need, you're going to get honest responses back, and that's going to influence all of this. Absolutely all of this. It's smart business. And for all of the best cases that I'll share with you today, they did this. They asked their employees what they wanted, what they needed to do a better job. And the reason this works, first of all, everyone likes to be asked their opinion. I mean, everyone, I hope. We all want to be asked our opinion. But even more than that, we want to hear back from our employers that A, we heard you, and B, we're going to act on what you've said in some way. Now, let's be clear here. Organizations are never going to meet you 100% of the time on everything that you want. They're not there for that. They're there to make money. But they're going to move as much as they can in order to keep their employees happy and sustainable. Their labor market within their company is sustainable. So benefits are an easy way to start. Westpac is an Australian bank. It's one of the largest banks in Australia. It's also one of the first organizations worldwide that has really leaned into demographic change as a driver for their business. This is not a surprise. The businesses that have really taken up demographics, and especially older adults as a business unit, have been in two primary areas. The first, financial services. That's banks, that's insurance companies. Why? It's in their interest to keep you alive. Individuals alive. Keep the money in, keep the money growing. Don't pay out benefits if they don't have to for sickness, disability, and even death. It's in their best interest to do this. Westpac knows this as a business. They're a financial and service institution. But Westpac also knows that diversity is their strength. Australia is in a really tough place demographically. Not only are they an aging population like us, not only have they seen lower birth rates like us, the difference between us and them is that they've actually experienced higher levels of emigration than the US and Canada, people actually leaving. So they're doubly, triply confronted with the challenges of demographic change that we don't have to deal with yet. Although we are seeing people leave the US at a fairly high, not a high rate, but a doubling in the past few years. Something that could be of a concern to us in the future. But Westpac does this all the time. Their human resources department is constantly in conversation with their employees, And because of that, they've developed what I think is one of the most robust, inclusive, diverse set of benefits of any company that I've ever seen. They want to meet you where you are at literally every turn of your life course. They were the first company in the world to offer grandparent leave. And for those of you who attended the last big session that we did, we talked about grandparent leave. It's no different than parental leave for some companies. Modifications might be as simple as making it unpaid for a year if you want to take off to take care of your grandkids or help in that caregiving journey for their parents. But it might be just getting days off, extra days off to go to your grandkids' play or go to their soccer game or see their graduation. Little things like that don't cost the company a lot, but what they signal to the employee is, we're here for you. Now, why did they move on grandparent leave? Any ideas? They moved primarily because they looked at the data hardcore of who was staying and who was leaving in their company. That was how they started. Really interesting case. And they realized that they were really soft on retention amongst bank tellers. And then they realized that the bank teller demographic was actually women between the ages of like 50 and 65. And they were just dropping like flies. I mean, leaving at an incredibly high rate against all other parts of the organization. So they did something radical. They reached out to these women employees and they said, what's going on? What can we do to improve your working condition so that you're staying? We can't lose you. You're a valuable resource. And across the board, the women said, we'd love to have more time with our grandkids. Cost Westpac nearly nothing to implement this policy. Their retention rates went through the roof as a result. But more importantly, it had that trickle-down effect, that cascading effect that impacted all parts of the organization because these employees were now happier. They were happier, they were more loyal to their company, and they were delivering a better service because they were happier now. So every time a person would engage with a teller, for example, at these different branches that fell into this very key demographic, they would see somebody who really loved their job, really felt valued. And this demographic shift that we're in right now is going to push a lot of companies to do this. We're seeing a significant number of companies now offering caregiving leave, which is a big one. It's huge in the United States right now. I'm sure it's getting quite large here in Canada as well, because healthcare is so expensive. So healthcare as an economic driver is actually pushing more adult children and even grandchildren into caregiving roles. So businesses are adapting by offering some additional levels of caregiving leave to their enterprises. Menopause is a huge new demographic change benefit that companies are leveraging right now. I think we're at probably about 25 or 30% of American companies are now offering this. It was 0 5 years ago. So it signals just how significant the shift is, and it ranges in support. It ranges from everything from extreme as covering HRT, hormone replacement therapy, thank you, to unpaid leave or days off for health reasons. But consistently, it's the same story out of every organization. Adobe, Bank of America, Pfizer, they asked their employees what they wanted, and their employees came back and said, we could really use some help with this. And then they implemented accordingly. For older adults and for people who want to stay in the workforce long term, obviously they're looking at things like every other person wants, younger workers too. Flexible work, health and well-being programs. For older adults, more and more phased retirement plans or options if they can get them. I love the fact that some companies are starting to do sabbaticals now again. I think that's phenomenal. Offering mid-career adults a break to get out there and either travel or learn something new and then bring that back to the company. And of course, helping people, being a partner with your employees in that lifelong transition from being a young adult to an older adult, being part of that within the company. And of course, something as simple as recognition programs. I know this probably sounds super redundant and super silly to even mention, but by recognizing the value of experience within companies, you can really set up both younger workers to see an aspirational goal, but reward older workers for staying around and continuing to contribute. Too many older workers that I speak to today say, I feel undervalued at my office. I feel like people don't listen to me. I feel like I'm kind of secondary in conversation or locked out completely. Companies can actively turn that around. Designing inclusive workspaces. This is probably the biggest and most expensive for a company, but it doesn't mean that it's not something that we shouldn't do. There are a number of different things when applying basic universal design principles to a workplace. It's a lot easier to do this in a new build versus a renovation. But again, first rule, talk to a diverse set of employees about what they need in their workplace, what they want in their workplace to really succeed. And I'm just going to run through the basics here. Some for you that are designers here will see this and say, oh, Jan, I know this, but for those of you who are not, they quickly run through is things as simple as equitable use, making sure that the design works for the largest number of people. Not only are you meeting regulatory requirements, but in many cases going above and beyond, signaling that you're there more than the base government standard requires. And this is for everything. This isn't just for wheelchair use. This is also for little and tall people. Because I'm a very tall guy, and I can tell you, workspaces don't always work for me. Minor accommodations can make that happen. Flexibility in use is a huge one. Allowing a differing level of abilities to have a differing level of experience within the actual physical space. This can ever be anything from like dimmable lighting to personalized temperature controls. Super simple, but also really important to making sure that people feel engaged in the workplace. Simple and intuitive use. I think some of you may have heard, I know some of you heard already, some of you may have overheard my experience at Pearson yesterday, Pearson Airport, which was, wow, quite an experience indeed. In part because the design of the space, the delivery of information was so poor. This is something that organizations broadly can develop not only for their workspaces, but if you have a retail environment or a commercial environment, can also translate to there. It sounds simple, but wayfinding is a major component of getting this right. And that can be done through tactile means, it can be done through visual cues, it can be done even by sense. Yes, even sense can be used, and lighting can be used to get people moving in the right direction within a work environment. But above all else, make it clear, make it simple, make it something that most people can understand, but you don't get there until you talk to these diverse communities, and especially older adults, because they are left out of the conversation up until this point. Perceptible information, similar, but this is, of course, as we get to designing more digital products. How many people actually work for a big company in here? Oh, okay. Or you own your company? Big companies are notorious for their trainings. Especially their online and video trainings, which I think if you've sat through them before, you know how mind-numbingly boring they are. Simple way to solve for this for some people is to make sure that everything's closed captioned. I know it sounds redundant. I know it sounds overly simple, I know it sounds like it might just be something for people who are deaf or low hearing, but the reality is younger people today read more television than listen to it. This has just become a norm now because it's easier for us to digest and perceive information that we read than what we hear. So while we might think that we're designing this for a subset of the population that may be in need, it actually benefits all of us, and all of these things do. Tolerance for error, another big element to consider across this, making sure that spaces are clean and they function in a way that makes sense. And of course, size and space for approach and use. This, of course, gets into the questions about mobility more than anything else. And of course, low physical effort. And I mention this because, man, there are a lot of buildings that are designed by very strong men, physically strong men. And I was just in New York last week at Hearst Tower. And if you know what Hearst Tower is, it's this stunning building. It's relatively new. It's fully LEED certified, 47 stories, I think, presenting on the 44th floor, which has this spectacular view of Central Park. I mean, it's one of those places that actually causes me to lose my breath. And as I opened the door to enter this space, the door closed behind me and I met somebody just inside, and I hear somebody open the door, and it's a smaller woman, and she goes, "Oh, my God, this door." That is not an unusual experience. That is not an unusual experience. Is that the people, the need for space requires that we think about just the weight of doors. And that can make a space a hell of a lot more inviting to most people and can allow people to feel, not only gain access easier, but make them feel as though the space was designed with them in mind. Now, like I said, not every business can do everything. Businesses have to meet a standard. It's a base standard for design within our regulatory framework. But by going above and beyond where you can, it really indicates a commitment to the future. Also, by engaging these populations, I probably sound like I'm beating you over the head with this. By engaging these populations, we know that they're going to feel like they're part of the process. And they should, especially if you take up their suggestions. I travel in and out of National Airport in Washington, D.C. all the time. And because I do this work, I'm always on the lookout for really great design, and more importantly, really bad design. Because I think it's important to show the stuff that's fantastic, but also the stuff that's really terrible. And American Airlines has their brand new lounge in the new terminal at National Airport, and it includes a handicap accessible restroom for both people who are in need of wheelchair access, but also for folks that need a private space, either to take care of a child, or they need a non-binary or a bathroom that makes them feel comfortable. I went to that bathroom first because that's the bathroom I thought, this is where they're going to get everything right. It's a beautiful space, mind you. The bathroom is designed to ADA perfection. You can get a wheelchair in there, the grab bars in there on the right space. It is stunning. The problem? The bathroom is all black. Black floors, black toilet, black ceiling, and low lighting. So what they didn't consider in the construction of this space, and this is a mistake that businesses make all the time, is the intersection of disability and the intersection of use. So, hey, if you're in a wheelchair and you've got fantastic vision, that bathroom's going to look pretty chic. But if you have any vision challenges whatsoever, it's not going to work for you. They put up a barrier to your access. Unintentionally, too. Unintentionally. Again, you get around this by engaging more people in the design process up front. So let's talk about how companies are really leveraging this. If you were here for my last presentation, we talked about BMW. BMW was really the first leader to lean into demographic change and build their workforce around it. In Porsche, and BMW made at the time, which is in 2008. So God, we're at the 2009. We're at the 15th anniversary of their innovations. They spent about $50,000 in close cooperation with their employees to build a more inclusive work environment. They invested in things like stretching stations, making sure people had ergonomically designed shoes, making sure that There were magnifying glasses at each place that people worked, making sure people could get up and move from station every day because that repetitive motion really does a number on the body. $50,000 they spent on this. 5 years ago, just before COVID broke out, Porsche spent $1 billion to build a brand new factory centered around ergonomic design, and more importantly, to extend the working lives of their employees. That was their goal. Why? Let's harken back to the beginning of the presentation. Because there is a demographic pressure on these factories so heavy right now that if they don't act and they don't extend working lives, not just for their older employees, but also for their younger employees, they will not have a sustainable pipeline to build luxury automobiles for the world. Now, let me see if I can get this right.
We're here at the Porsche factory in Leipzig, one of the most innovative car factories in the world. The technology isn't just going into the cars, it's also helping workers do their job.
The tech here ranges from the mundane looking to the mind-blowing. And to talk me through it is Porsche's ergonomics specialist, Anna Heinrich.
At Porsche, the human is in the center of attention. That's why ergonomics is part of our strategy to optimize all workplaces at our plant. It supports the quality and the function, but especially it supports the health of our employees.
Some of the equipment looks deceptively simple. Fortunately, Anna is on hand to explain the deeper significance.
Okay, so these guys look like they're in office chairs. Describe what they're doing.
Of course, it's no standard office chair. It's a special chair for working under the car. It uses the strain and shoulder neck, and you have the tray for the tools and for some parts. And the chair has smooth rolling rolls.
So they can sort of dash from one area to the other, or even to a different car, and it's pretty easy.
Elsewhere, the tech is much more impressive, rotating the entire chassis of each car so workers don't have to raise their arms above their heads.
It's definitely easier for me to work not with the head up, so I can have not to put my arms to the high, and I can work more in front of my body, and much more easier. I have more power to put the stuff inside the car. And when I see my other older colleagues, I think I can work still much longer here in this facility, maybe the next 3 decades. Or, yeah.
Helping employees work later into their lives is key for factories across the country. Germany's birth rate is one of the lowest in the world, and immigration alone isn't enough to replace skilled workers lost to retirement.
Together with rising life expectancies and the aging of the baby boomer generation, the population is aging and the workforce is aging as well. So if Germany can't deal successfully with an aging workforce, then productivity and innovation is at stake, because we need older workers to work successfully and to grow the economy and to keep innovating.
So, how much of a difference can technology really make for the average factory worker? I'm about to find out.
I don't feel like I could lift more, but I could do something 1,000 times. And I think I could probably just hold my arms out for half an hour if I wanted to. It doesn't even feel like anything.
Okay, so I may not have magically become Iron Man or even a half-decent production worker, but it soon became clear that this technology would provide much-needed support if I were doing this job all day long.
So when I lift this, I don't feel like I have superhuman strength, but it's also easy for me to do this repetitively. So, you know, in a sense, is that the point of having this technology?
Yeah, right. That's the goal of our exoskeleton, to make the working lives much easier for the employees.
The objective here is to take the strain off employees, regardless of their age. As other countries face the challenge of aging workforces, it's a philosophy that could keep our workers and our economies moving.
So you hear those themes there over and over again. This isn't just about older workers. And if we're framing this as an issue just for older workers, we've already lost the audience. We've already lost the audience because we have a bias historically against older adults. We see them as redundant. We see them as cast-offs. This is unfortunate, but it's truth. when you are able to cast this as an economic opportunity, a business imperative, all of a sudden, these big organizations sink their teeth into it because they realize the economic potential of extending working lives, not just for older employees, but for all workers. I think that young man put it the best. You know, I can work longer because of this. People realize, young people in particular, realize that their working lives are going to be longer than their parents. That reality has sunk in, much to their chagrin. But if businesses are showing that they're truly invested in these people, they're going to be able to retain them for longer periods of time too. And there's an upside to that. Now, of course, recruiting inclusive teams is something that we have probably lagged on at big organizations worldwide, especially as it relates to older adults. Why is this? Well, consistently when you speak to these companies and for hiring managers and recruitment managers, they're careful about what they say because it's illegal to say we're not hiring older adults. But when you ask them about their concerns, one of the biggest concerns is price. Older adults with a lot of experience, they think cost more. This is not always the case. Especially for adults that might be past that retirement age. They're not necessarily looking at a high-paying job. They're looking at something maybe like a flexible job that takes advantage of their skills, maybe 10 or 20 hours a week versus the standard 40. So how do you get access to those folks in a more cohesive way? Obviously, a flexible benefit is one of them. But recruiting an inclusive team requires us to think differently across the board. It requires us to think about both what we need in terms of our actual manpower needs, but also in terms of how we're communicating that need to an outward world. Language is very important. Like, I'm not an overly sensitive guy to language personally, because I know the intent is there for most of these organizations, but language can be a real barrier for folks that are applying for a job, and really surprising number of older adults see barriers to language all the time in recruitment advertisements. Things like go-getter, digital native, probably one of the worst offenders of this. Basically suggests that if you were born, before 1977, I'm a 77 baby myself, you don't know technology well. You're not willing to learn as a result. But Adecco has made it clear, it's a staffing agency for those of you who don't know, that it is important for them to attract talent of all ages. So first things first, think about that language up front. Are you getting it right? How could you get it perfect? Talk to older adults on your team. That's a big way to get there. Never place limits on experience. I receive at least one phone call a week from a person who is older. And when I say older, I'm talking starting in their late 40s now, saying, I was told I can't get a job because I had too much experience. There is no such thing as too much experience. There is such a thing as a company that doesn't understand how to leverage your experience. That is a consistent theme, though. Companies have to actively target diverse demographics. Now, there's been movement on race, there's been movement on gender, there's been movement on LGBT, but not on age, not for diversity on age yet. We are starting to see some companies move on that. I'll share one last business case with you before we wrap. But some top line recommendations are to implement blind recruiting whenever you can. So take away things like education years, take away things like years of experience, et cetera. Hire for the actual skills that you use. Definitely leverage referrals whenever you can as a hiring manager, but be careful about those. Because guess who we tend to refer? People who look and act just like us. Okay? They look just like us. If I'm going to refer somebody to a place of employment, they're going to look a lot like me. They're going to act a lot like me. That's a natural bias. We have to force people to go past that natural bias. But when they can't, we have to make sure that we're reaching out to our diverse pool of workers to say, hey, do you have somebody you think might fit this position well? Always focus on skills and abilities, not software and technology. And I really want to double, triple underline this, because as we move into this period of not just swift demographic change, but also swift technological change, these specific skills around software and tech are changing. Pretty consistently across the board, people are saying, you know what, the liberal arts look really strong now. We need people that have the liberal arts degrees to really connect with these technologies. And man, isn't that a departure from where we were not too long ago, where it was skills, skills, skills all the time. I like to say that the ideal employee for me has the 4 C's. They are creative, they are great communicators, they are culturally sensitive, and they are, and I lost my 4th, but they are constantly connecting across different ways of thinking. They are adept and agile in the way they approach their work. And in many ways, people who have had to navigate the world in a different way have that adaptability in place already. And of course, rethinking cultural fit. You know, there is no industry probably more likely to be ageist in the world than the tech industry. Culture is really big for them. Culture means you're out when you're 40. And I love the fact that just this last week, Mark Zuckerberg, who famously said no one over 40 had any value, turned 40 himself. So does this mean we get to be rid of him? I hope not, because it actually illustrates, once again, that there is great value in age and there is great value in longevity within organizations. The last piece, and I know we want to get to some questions, is communicate inclusion. Because you can do all those things, but if people don't know about them, they don't exist. It's the old adage, if a tree falls in the woods and no one is around, does it make a sound? Same thing with inclusion. And you have to not only walk the talk, but talk the walk as well. L'Oreal is one of those companies that's really gone headfirst into this in the past year. And you're gonna say, L'Oreal, a beauty company that does anti-aging products? Yes, L'Oreal, that same company, because L'Oreal is a French-based company, and L'Oreal has significant labor challenges within France right now, significant labor challenges in France. And because of that, they've built out this new program called L'Oreal for All Generations, which is promoting intergenerational diversity across their enterprise, thinking about their health and well-being initiatives differently, really investing in that life course of education and retraining to make sure that people have the skills needed across the life course as long as they're there. But I think they're doing something cool about transitioning people to retirement. You know, having that conversation early with their workers to say, hey, you know, when are you thinking about exiting? Do you have a plan? And how can we help you with that plan? Now, again, that's not completely altruistic. By doing that and having that honest conversation with their workers, they actually set up succession planning at the same time, understanding when people might exit. And what's really cool, and we've seen this not just in companies like L'Oreal, they're facilitating life projects post-company. So that can be anything from part-time work, consulting, to volunteering. In the US, there are 2 companies of note that have done this really well. They are CVS Health, and CVS allows its quote-unquote retired workers who snowbird in the South to actually transfer their job to Southern pharmacies during the cold months. Pretty cool way of approaching it. UPS, now UPS, as you know, is the parcel delivery service worldwide. UPS also gets workers young and retires them early. Good friend of mine is approaching 50, and I think he's got 3 years left before he can retire from UPS. UPS has an ambassadors program, and their ambassadors program connects their workers to the company. So when they go into peak season, Christmas in particular, they reach out to these men and women and say, hey, we've got extra shifts available. If you'd like to come in and work, we'd love to have you. Little things help build the enterprise long term. So on that, I'd like to show you this quick video from L'Oreal, then we'll go into some Q&A rather. Pretty full, right? This brings us to the conclusion, and this is what I recommend to my clients and businesses that are willing to listen to these conversations about our demographic future. We have to adopt this new mantra going forward that ageism itself is bad for business, and this is from blocking people in recruitment to pushing people out earlier than they're ready because of some age-based measure that is false. That age is not a good measure of ability or interest at all. What we're seeing is greater adaptability, greater curiosity amongst those that want to stay engaged for longer periods of time. This is a component of our inclusion strategies. And most business leaders agree to that. They just haven't moved on it yet internally. So that's a call to action today, is if you can talk about this as central to inclusion and essential to growth, it's important because inclusion does stimulate innovation. And what we're looking at here with this explosion of older adults across our countries is a brand new marketplace of people. And if they stay engaged in work, they're going to continue to spend as consumers. That's a brand new market. Companies love that. And of course, we know this intrinsically, but sometimes businesses need reminded, if you're inclusive, you're going to outperform those that don't. So on that, I thank you for your time, of course. If you'd like to follow us more, the top QR code takes you to Be Human Change's website, Human Change's website rather. And the bottom is a media venture that was launched this year called New Rules Media, where we report on the big issues of the day. Three editions come out each week on issues like climate change, demographic change, and of course, technological change through a resilience lens, helping individuals and businesses actually build resilience for the future. Because yes, this is a crazy time, folks. It's a really crazy time, but with the right data and the right insights, and of course, some creative thinking, we can get through it. Thank you. So how much time do we have for questions? Okay, so why don't we dive in? Yes, sir. Let me give you the mic. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. You said that there were two industries that are doing particularly well. Yeah. One was financial services.
Healthcare.
You never said the second one.
Healthcare. My apologies. Healthcare has done a good job of considering this. Healthcare has done less of a good job of adapting to this. Part of its physical plant. A lot of the hospitals were built a while ago, at least in our countries. Like, you don't see a lot of new hospitals going up. There is still this challenge when it comes specifically to physical design of spaces, where people, even in congregate settings, even things like nursing homes and acute care settings, that they're building just to the standard of what the government says they need to build to. That's not enough anymore. Let me give you an example of this. I had emergency surgery 2 years ago, just after my book came out, and was rushed to Georgetown University Hospital. This is just kind of in that post-COVID period. The hospital was a mess. I mean, everything looked terrible. Georgetown's an old hospital too, by the way. In my follow-up, I go to see the doctor, and we're joking about like the fact that I'm a 44-year-old man at the time having an appendectomy. That's not that normal. And I tell her about my book, and I said, a big part of this is designing for the future. And she says, well, I mean, we've got everything covered here at Georgetown, don't we? And I said, your lighting's off. And she said, what? I said, your lighting's off. I said, it's built to ADA code, but your lighting is off. She goes, what do you mean? It's fluorescent lighting. That's the ADA code. Well, if I had any neurodiversity issues, and I could hear it, the humming of that light alone would have driven me bananas. Now, the last time we went through the ADA revisions, we didn't have LEDs. Certainly not affordable LEDs. We didn't have things like Hue light bulbs, which are readily affordable, off the counter, over the shelf rather. No, over the counter. It doesn't matter. We were able to get them. We're able to get access to these lighting options for space now that we didn't have before. So that's when I say it's really up to the business to think a bit more cohesively about really, do they want to be an inclusive enterprise? Most organizations will say yes now, and they're not saying yes just because it feels good. They believe in it, I think, for the most part. But also, what does inclusion mean to folks that are actually working there? And you don't get those answers until you speak to people on your team. So if you barrel forward and you reach out to a company, and I don't want to shame them, but like a Gensler, for example, that does inclusive design worldwide, accessible design worldwide, and they come in and they build just to the standard, you're not going to get a space that works for most people. You're going to get a space that works for the standard. And the little things you can do as a business owner really can be quite dramatic. We did this in a very personal project with my family. My parents moved into their quote unquote future-proofed home over Christmas this past year. And you walk into their home and the last thing you think is inclusive design. The last thing you think is universal design. The last thing you think is disability. And guess what? That was done by design. They did not want to be seen as older or infirmed in any way. Yet they have a bedroom on the first floor. The door to the entrance of the front of the house is 36 inches wide, which is standard for wheelchairs. The door to their bedroom is 36 inches wide, and to their bathroom is 36 inches wide. Those are the only doors in the house that are 36 inches wide. They didn't want anybody going into spaces that felt different, that felt not normal. Took out the thresholds. Nobody notices if they're not there in the first place. And did little things, like change out the stove. The stove is now an induction stove versus a gas stove. Why do we do that? Well, lowers the risk for burns, lowers the risk of leaving it on overnight because it just turns off. Those little things can really make an oversized impact. They can translate to business too. And I think most of us, just making some assumptions about the room here, most of us have been in a restaurant recently. I was in one last night where the noise level was so loud I couldn't enjoy the conversation. Restaurants like to have noisy spaces, but there's a limit to the tolerance that most people have. Are restaurateurs asking people about that noise? They're not. They're not seriously asking people about that noise. Are they asking people about lighting? No, they're not. Actively asking people about lighting. So what are they doing? They're actually excluding a pretty significant portion of the population. I would actively choose not to go to that restaurant again because I couldn't hear the folks I was having dinner with. And I've got perfect hearing. So healthcare is the second industry. As you probably picked up from the presentation, automotive is picking up on this. The reason automotive is picking up on this now is twofold. One, we have not had a really good pipeline of industrial workers, people who are willing to work in factories, because at least in the US, I think Canada's the same. I think the UK is pretty much the same as well. We've told people for about 40 or 50 years, you've got to go get a college degree. Actually, that's most of Europe now. We've told people you've got to go get a college degree. You've got to have a university degree. That's the only way you're going to get ahead in this world. Well, it turns out today, if you go to a trade school and you learn a trade like plumbing, you can do that for a fairly affordable price and come out and earn $80,000 to $100,000 in your first year. Meanwhile, if you go to school for social work, I hope there are no social workers here because I don't want to. Sorry, Pat. Yeah, if you got to work for social work, you're spending upwards in the United States of $200,000 for an education now, and that's for a bachelor's degree, not your master's, which you really need to make more than the minimum, and you're earning like $35,000 or $40,000 a year. So we're starting to see a shift in how young people are thinking about their education in the United States, largely driven by demographic change, because the demographics are changing. There are more opportunities to work in these fields now, but also those economic pressures. We have a supply and demand issue when it comes to workforce, but Canada's similar. So go ahead, she's got the mic. I gotta leverage her, but you'll be next.
Hi.
Hey.
Thank you so much. A fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
I'm learning tons, so thank you. I was just curious, do you have data, and if so, what's it saying with respect to sub-Saharan Africa?
I said earlier, there are only two types of countries in this world, those that are aging and growing and those that are aging and declining in terms of population. Africa is aging and growing, sub-Saharan Africa in particular. But their reality is far different than ours here in the United States and Canada, far different. Women in sub-Saharan Africa, let's take the country of Niger as an example here. 5 years ago, women in Niger were having on average about 7.3 babies per person. 7.3. That's a lot of kids per person to have, and that's an average. Is now down below 7. So while that number is still incredibly high, I think it's about 6.8 or 6.9, while that number is still incredibly high, it is still declining. And what the concern is, I'm not sure if concern is even the right word here. The concern about the current models for predicting global population growth are based more on the European model than the Chinese model. And when I say that, in Canada and the United States, our aging process started around the first days of the Industrial Revolution. So for the United States, this is about the same time as the revolution, so about 1770s, okay? We've had a very slow and steady decline in birth rates over that time period. You know, my grandfather, 1914, he was one of 8 kids. Prior to that, those numbers were kind of the same, 8 to 10 kids for families. He had 2 kids. My parents had 2 kids. I have no kids. My brother has 2 kids. So it's continually declined. In a country like China, so this has taken us about 100 to 200 years to really make this transition. Japan did it in 70. Korea did it in 50. China did it in 30. So China went from a 100% youth population to a country now that has this exploding population of older adults, exploding, and no replacement. They also have no immigration, no serious immigration. There are plenty of Canadians and Americans that have moved there looking for economic opportunity in the manufacturing sector. We know those stories, we read about them in the news. It is not a large enough number to fix their underlying challenge. And what we know up until now is that birth rates, once they decline, can't be turned around, at least at the national scale. Countries like Japan, France, the Nordic countries have pumped money into this, Haven't been able to turn them around. They've been able to slow them for a bit, maybe get them up 1 year, but for the most part, when they come down, they're down. What drives this? Technological change, social change, economic change. The nature of the family has changed, but the biggest thing is that women have changed. Now this is no blame game here. Okay, I want to make sure I'm clear about that because people swipe at me sometimes for saying that. But women over the past 100 years have seen a remarkable evolution in their role in society. Remarkable. Moving from the home into the office, becoming educated, having access to contraception, all of these things allow women to have control over their fertility destiny. And if you want to have kids, great. If you want to be a mother, awesome. But a large number of women are opting out of that, or they're opting to do it later in life. The fastest growing group of mothers in the States right now are women over the age of 40. And that's across all economic groups. It's not just the rich anymore. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm just wondering, the aspect related, I'm thinking that there's a direct relation to what's happening in business and the focus on, shareholder value and that kind of thing. So I'm also here in Canada, one of the fastest growing populations are Indigenous folks.
Yes.
That have their own worldviews and ways of seeing things,
Yes.
etc. And so you're also seeing within business things like the B Corp movement and those kinds of things that are at least, considering or maybe moving toward a triple bottom line and ESG, again, even being pushed by folks like shareholders. So I'm wondering if there's any data that's beyond those things that are supporting maybe a move to a different financial model?
Shareholders want ESGs as long as they're profitable. That's the flat statement there. No one is investing in a company that's losing money. Interesting you mentioned Indigenous populations though. And I appreciate you saying that because it's such a perfect cue. Indigenous populations tend to live in more traditional societies that are male-dominated, patriarchal societies. at least traditional in terms of the way they work and the way they operate, with a lot of young people at the bottom and very few older adults at the top. In fact, the only state in the United States that has a birth rate that meets replacement rate right now is South Dakota. And that's because of the indigenous population. That's it. So places that have kind of a more traditional designed population tend to have those higher birth rates overall. Is it consistent everywhere? No, there are going to be exceptions to the rule. There is one town in Japan called Nagi. If you want to take a look at it, it's a really interesting case. They're one of the few areas that we know that has actually increased their birth rate above replacement rate, and have done it for a number of years now. And they have taken what I refer to as the Hillary Clinton approach to family and community. And I only say that because of the title of her book, It Takes a Village. And they've taken this approach that having children historically was the responsibility of the entire village. Everyone played a role in the rearing of children from birth until adulthood. Everyone had a role. And that role could be as simple as making sure Bobby didn't do something bad at the ball game. And if he did, you reported it back to his parents, or actually having a more nurturing role as educators and teachers and the like. That we've lost. That kind of traditionalness to community we've lost. Can it be regained? Nagi suggests that we can regain it. But it does take investment and it does take time. And it involves, in our modern context, both men and women both rethinking their roles and giving up a little bit about where they're at right now. So I'm not going to be prescriptive here. That's a pit to fall into, but like they're doing stuff that is actually pretty cool. Financial incentives are one thing; those don't always work. But making sure that everyone actually sees themselves as having a role in a child's upbringing has been, I think, one of their big takeaways. Because throwing money at the problem doesn't work. And Japan wants to scale this; they can't figure out how to scale this nationally. So Japan, they've been losing population now for over a decade, since 2014, with no end in sight. So they're about 30% of their population over 65 now. That's going to go to about 40% in the next couple of years. No, this one. Yeah. We have one from the. Let's do this one first.
I don't need
I know you've been
I
waiting.
don't think I'm pretty loud.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, people online. I'll be loud. You mentioned earlier the poorly designed or not perfectly designed bathroom at the airport, and I think it's that's probably the part the place in the world that's the worst designed, and it's not
Correct.
the airport, it's the airplanes.
Yeah.
Airplanes appear to be exempt from all AODA compliance.
That's correct.
There's not a single accessible bathroom on any commercial airplane
that is
on
correct.
the planet.
That is correct.
Do you see that changing as?
So it's funny you ask. A very good friend of mine works for Boeing. Not the easiest place to work these days, but I reached out to him 2 years ago to talk about airplane design because I think it's a great failing. It's awful. There are two primary areas, I would say, where interest outweighs inclusion. One is airplanes, the other is historical spaces. And those interests are really almost intractable.
Apparently Europe is requiring airlines.
There's an attempt. It is nearly impossible at this stage. I'm not saying it's not impossible for the future. There's great innovations happening in airplanes right now, but it's nearly impossible to design an airplane for a full-size wheelchair. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try, but I even suggested, because I've traveled with friends who are using wheelchairs, and the experience for them is subhuman, I would say. And for the folks that have grown up with a disability, not to minimize it, it's part of life for them. Like they know this dignity, it's part of the game. Doesn't make it any less good, it just makes it what it is. But for folks that have not had a disability, they might kind of wake up to one a mobility disability and they experience that, it's jarring because it's a very inhuman experience. My recommendation to him was, have you thought about making the seats, at least in first, removable so that you have a, correct. And that was the answer. That was the answer. They are not, we could remove them, but they are bolted in a certain way to FAA guidelines. And we would have to figure out a new way to have essentially a first class seat that can be rolled on and then bolted in as the passengers come on. Those seats have to be bolted, it's reg. And, I get that. Like, we build regulations all the time, but that also suggests to me a real limit in creativity. And if we limit ourselves in our creativity or the way we design spaces, or just think about design in general across all of these verticals, we're not going to meet the future well. So I'm with you. I'm
just thinking of an aging population.
Well,
more disabilities, and those people
yes.
presumably have money to spend.
Listen, I fly between DC and Miami on a regular basis, and this is not hyperbole in any way. If that jet bridge isn't lined from the door of the plane out to the gate area with wheelchairs for each trip, it's not a full flight. So you just have to go to the airport to see what a dramatic demographic shift we're going through. And the fact that so many people require, and airports in general are terrible. I mean, let's be fair here. Even the new ones are terrible, and the moving walkways do not do what they need to do, and they're broken most of the time. Like, getting from point A to point B at an airport is hard. And, until planes change or the transportation change, we need those large footprints. So I don't have a solution, but I think that in any touch point that you can solve for, we should solve for. So I agree with you. Airplanes are bad. There's one on the phone.
Yeah, so we have a question from our live stream. So the question is, many workers are currently caught between raising kids and taking care of their aging parents. While this has been ongoing for a long time, anecdotally, it seems like they are in a situation as our elderly population has a longer life expectancy. Aside from caregiving leave, what are companies doing to support their employees through this time? Have you heard of some really cutting-edge approaches?
This is an area where companies will only be able to do so much. It's not that they don't want to, and at least in theory, but are they really doing much more than that? No, caregiving is the primary benefit right now. What I think you're starting to see in companies is a realization that the caregiver might not look like the caregiver you think. And that's a pretty significant leap forward, because raise your hand if you think a caregiver is a woman in her mid-50s. That's what companies think. Men are taking up caregiving roles at a faster rate now. It's not perfect, but it's happening. The data suggests that. But really, I mean, shockingly, and I guess this shouldn't come as a shock, it's a reality and it's the way things really were for most of human history, is that younger people are taking up caregiving, Gen Z, at an astonishingly fast pace. Unpaid, and all unpaid. For those of you online, unpaid was mentioned here. Unpaid. So how do they meet them? The leave is the easiest thing that they can do. It's the greatest signal that, yeah, we're here to help you. And of course, flexibility. Like, it's not just the unpaid leave, it's the flexibility. Like, hey, my mom can't take my grandma to the hospital today. Can I do that instead? And what's driving this? Okay, the cost of caregiving is one thing. Okay, that's a big thing in the States right now. But also what's happening in the States, and I know it's happening in the GTA too, is the cost of housing. Collective sigh. Yes, the cost of housing is absolutely insane now. And what that has done is that has pushed 1/5 of the American population, the US population rather, into multi-generational housing. I mean, that's crazy. That returns us to a historic norm where we did cohabitate with mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and our aunts and uncles under one roof. That returns us to a way the world has always been, where the house isn't just a social unit, the house is also an economic unit. That is a big shift. So what I say early on, what do we need to do? We need to look back at historic examples as well as look to the future, because some of the things that we did pre-social welfare, we're going back to them now, whether we like it or not. So businesses need to pay attention to that as well. And again, engaging your employees. There's no perfect solution for this. And if you're 100% of the caregiver 100% of the time, a business can't afford to keep you if you're not there. So it's that towing of the line.
You found another piece of research for that too.
Good.
Did you learn from COVID that you can work at home? So if you're a caregiver, can you also care for who you're working? Like if an organization will allow you to work from home, which we certainly found out during COVID, then you can also take a look at, do you have to work 9 to 5? Or can you work on task and that task be completed when you have time and deliver by whatever day it's needed, which means that you can work at 2 in the morning. You can work at whatever time you want and continue to caregive. We're also looking at the cost of daycare. So if you now can work from home, depending on what you're doing, or have a small unit like a fourplex or 2 or 3 people on your street, can you work in community and handle the caregiving and the employment? So it's thinking outside the norm and understanding that we can work 24 hours a day if we want, and it's not Monday to Friday. That's an old agricultural model.
Yeah, agriculture and Henry Ford model. You know, I went home to Pittsburgh for Mother's Day because I'm a good son, and I flew from DC and landed in Pittsburgh. And if you know Pittsburgh, they're building a new terminal, which is actually really cool. They're right sizing it for their population because Pittsburgh's population is smaller than it was when they built the first airport. Regardless, my mom says, as we're pulling out, she goes, check that sign out. You're gonna love that. And amidst, you know, an array of construction signs, there's this big orange one that in the middle that says Child Care Center with an arrow. And I said, wait, why would they have a child care center at the airport? She goes, they had to build it for the parents. They couldn't get the right workers in, so they had to build a child care facility on site to get the workers they needed. But again, did they do this because they wanted to? No, they didn't do this because they wanted to. They did this because there was a pressure, and they did this because they asked these prospective employees, what do you need? Ginger's right. The nature of work has changed for a lot of us, but there are a lot of us that have to do those 9 to 5s too. So finding kind of the middle ground within companies, I think, is what the future looks like. There are also plenty of functions within companies that can be done 100% outside of your house or outside of your workspace. I'm nervous about some of those though, and I'll be transparent about that, because if they can be done outside of your home, outside of your workplace, they can be done outside of the United States too. So there's always a fear of outsourcing labor to other countries where it's simply more affordable. And let me give you a really funny example from New York City, because everyone loves this story because it's so crazy. This small restaurant just outside of Greenwich Village, you walk into it and you are greeted by a restaurant clerk who's on a Zoom from Manila. They have gotten around the cost of labor, which in New York City I think is now $25 minimum wage. They're paying this person $2 an hour. So a cautionary tale here is, yes, businesses will be flexible with you as long as they can, as long as they're still making money, but they're getting really creative now too in skirting some of the rules on labor. It's easy for small businesses to pick up a PA or a part-time assistant now in any country that is lower income for a fraction of the cost. And for those folks that I know that work with personal assistants from Philippines in particular, Thailand as well, they say it's the best worker they've ever had. So the competition of labor is changing too. And I didn't want to get too deep into that because that's a whole other conversation for a whole other day. But this demographic pressure is liberalizing labor markets in a way that we've never experienced in our lifetimes. In the fall, New Zealand, that lovely little country, ran full-page ads. The city of Wellington ran full-page ads in the New York Times for 2 weeks during the Women's World Cup, advertising Americans to move there, offering them not only jobs, but offering them access to housing as well, giving them credits for housing. So if you think that our labor challenges are just domestic, they're not, because there are external pressures right now. And in these countries that are really experiencing this heavy pressure of demographic change, they're coming for our folks too. So we've got to compete and innovate accordingly. Go ahead.
So thank you very much for your talk. I teach sociology of health and social entrepreneurship. So I'm going to give a question sort of criticizing some of these companies.
Yep.
So you mentioned the example of L'Oreal.
Yep.
So my issue with companies like that is they bring up this image of we're going to promote health and wellness in the workplace. Mm-hmm. My argument towards that is it's nonsense. It's nonsense because they produce makeup, which is the #1 cause of cancer, one of the #1 causes of cancer for women.
Right.
So telling women who work at L'Oreal, we have health and wellness initiatives and we'll make it a better workplace for you. And then you can breathe the chemicals in the workplace to make the makeup that's going to make you sick and give you cancer, but we do health and wellness. Right. And then other examples, I went to a food conference and Pepsi was there. Mm-hmm. And Pepsi said, you know, all of you consultants here and education experts, what can we do to be more profitable? My answer to them is stop making Pepsi, right? Like that's literally the answer to them, right? And then you can keep on going down the list like Compass and Aramark, controlling food services across the US and Canada and putting in fast food places in hospitals and retirement homes and colleges and universities, leading to millions of people getting sick, and them saying, well, we have all these new initiatives, health and wellness, man.
Yeah.
So sort of the question is like, it's really hard for me to look at these organizations and say, well, look at all the wonderful things you're doing for the aging population. Right. And right, I'll give one more final example. Yeah. I went to a talk by Joel Bakan, who wrote the book on the corporation. Yeah. And he was giving the funniest example. And he said, after the corporation, I thought corporations will never want to speak to me. It was the opposite. They were inviting him to talks to talk about how they could be more socially conscious and sustainable. And he goes, I'm not going to name the company, but he goes, I went to this company and they took me to the tour and they're telling me, we've created this fully sustainable workplace. We've created these wonderful initiatives for our workers. And he goes, so what do you produce? We produce weapons. Yeah. For wars. Yeah. He goes, fantastic. So how do we become even better? Yeah. Right. So that's sort of my long-winded question
So we have a saying in the South that you can put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. There are plenty of companies that do bad things in the public sphere that do pretty good things in their workforce development. Because they can disassociate what they're doing in the public space in terms of what they're selling, the markets that they're capturing, you know, the level of destruction depending on environmental or war, and disassociate that with how they're treating their employees. There is not a single company in the world that's without sin. I think we all need to realize that first and foremost. L'Oreal, just like you said, you know, chemicals alone, L'Oreal is also one of the most aggressive perpetrators of ageism in the world. They have actively promoted anti-aging products for decades, and now they've pivoted to pro-aging. Lipstick on a pig. That doesn't mean that there isn't some good here, you know, and that doesn't mean that there aren't things that we can learn from that they're doing. PepsiCo, as you said, is a perfect example of a company that doesn't offer much in terms of the health and well-being of the population. Yet Indra Nooyi, when she came on, made health and well-being her central focus of the company. There's an irony to that. You know, I think that even when you take a look at the companies that are centered on longevity, You can poke holes if you really want to. I think the Blue Zones, for example, which is now the Blue Zones Health Center is based in Miami now, or at least their first health center is based in Miami. This is a multi-million-dollar company now. I saw Blue Zones snack bars at my store the other day. These are things that don't fall apart, but that have a great long shelf life. The only way you get to that is by actually having chemicals in the food. So even a company like the Blue Zones, which is actively saying, you need to have this healthy lifestyle and this is how we're promoting it, they're still hawking goods that aren't good for us. So no one gets 100%, no one gets an A+, but some are at least showing other companies how to do it in a way that might be sustainable for the future as it relates specifically to the labor market.
I think a big piece that we really need to focus on, and we certainly are here at Humber, is the trades, as Bradley said. Like new construction, you can use AI, no problem. If you're renovating your home, you need a carpenter, and you want a carpenter that's good, a carpenter that's well-trained. And learning how to be an excellent carpenter takes time. So you need that mentorship. So this is where I think that whole aging situation can be, you learn from both ends, right? So pulling up some of these things that we can do, building inclusive environments, renovations need the trades. There's no way around it. And most of us will be renovating, not purchasing a new home, right? For brand new. So just being able to think of these things in the minute, you know, that's the purpose of research. And this is why we do what we do, is we dig into this and we try and find new ways of doing something or building something or thinking about things that gets the population moving. So please keep coming.
Okay.
Keep questioning.
Yeah. Are there any more? We may have one up here. Oh, you got it.
Hi, Bradley.
Hey.
This was amazing. Loved the presentation and actually resonated on a couple of points. When you were talking about, you know, aging population and immigration, I think Canada, it also is experiencing or beginning to experience reverse immigration. Added to that is this whole international student situation that's going on.
I've heard, yeah.
Now, the bread and butter, as I understand, of the Canadian economy are the small and medium-sized businesses.
Virtually every country.
Right, yeah. And I've had conversations with some new friends that I've made. I'm a recent immigrant, by the way. I haven't been in Canada very long. Proud Canadian recently. And they often say that we don't have the money to invest in getting youth to join us and understand that they can stay with us longer. Because what I'm taking away from this conversation is aging is not a conversation for the ones who are aging only.
Correct.
It is a conversation that actually the youth need to be having because they will age and they want to be part of an organization where they see themselves aging at. How can these small to medium-sized businesses that say, we don't have the funds, we don't have the means to make major changes, what can they do to attract new talent? Like, have you had an experience? Have you heard of a small to medium-sized business that has done something like that?
My work doesn't focus much on small and medium-sized businesses. Let me be clear about that. So let me take this up to about a 30,000-foot view and make a pretty broad statement. Gen Z is wild. They are wild. They are completely unhinged in some regards. But they have entered a world that is radically different than the one that I did as a Gen Xer, or as others did as boomers, or even millennials. I wrote a piece a few weeks ago, and I encourage you to take a look at it, newrulesmedia.substack.com, comparing Gen Z to the greatest generation. And there was an audible gasp because people said, how dare you? How dare you? And I said, I'm not saying they are the greatest generation. That would be ridiculous to say. But when you take a look across a number of different verticals, they've encountered very similar headwinds that made the greatest generation what they were. They suffered through a pandemic. Most of them were born in a pandemic. They encountered the Great Depression, the most significant economic fate to hit this world. They were in the midst of a period of great technological evolution and communication technologies too, radio in particular. They encountered rising authoritarianism. and in some cases, a reversal of rights. They also were part of a very tight labor market. All of these things have happened to Gen Z. So as it relates to labor, we've got a mismatch, right? We've got a mismatch in the labor supply. Too few young, too many older adults have left. Gen Z is coming in right now. They are empowered. They have strong opinions. They're the most diverse generations that Canada or the United States has ever had. And they're saying, not for me. They are, I would say, almost in a full rebellion right now. So that puts a small and medium-sized employer in a bit of a bind. So how do they compete? Well, how have small and medium enterprises competed in the past? They've competed on other value propositions, offering the unsaid, offering those pieces that the big corporations can't around ESG. They're not polluting organizations. Something like 45%, I'd have to double check the stat for you, but something like 45% of Gen Z have said they will not work for a company. They've turned down job offers for companies that they do not believe have a good environmental footprint. So where do they go if they're not going to work for all of these polluters? Where are they going to go? Well, there are small and medium-sized enterprises that are actually doing the right thing. For millennials, I just want to mention millennials too, because I think they're just an interesting group of people because they're their own sandwich generation. Millennials are in this really unique opportunity right now. Those that have been able to scrimp and save a bit in particular, because the small and medium-sized enterprises that were built by boomers are for sale right now. And they're selling them at pretty rock bottom prices because they don't have children that want to buy them or want to take them over. So there are people, like there's a woman named Helen Gual, who's US based, who's built an entire business out of this, connecting people that have some money to buy these small and medium-sized enterprises that are fully functioning businesses, that are profitable, and they're known to be profitable. They just can't find a person in their family that just wants to take them over, but they're businesses that are there, and having that succession plan is actually a really smart move. But it's everything. It's everything from your local dry cleaner to a small farm are for sale right now, and these are a lot of profitable enterprises too. But Gen Z is crazy. I love them. I love them. They are unique with business, though. They are completely remaking the game, and they're not going to stop. They're certainly not going to stop until there's an economic slowdown and the labor market actually contracts and companies get a little bit more control. But companies have next to zero right now. And the places where they're exercising control, unfortunately, are coming back to those upper career folks. Gen Z is getting hit right now. Middle managers that are Gen Z are getting hit pretty hard in the States right now.
I think the other thing we need to think of is every technological innovation that was ever brought forward, the person who brought it forward was told they were crazy. So crazy can be a good thing because you can think outside of the norm. So those ideas are worth a lot.
Yeah, and if you're able to offer that benefit just of flexibility, I mean, everybody wants that. Everybody wants that. And small and medium-sized enterprises have a little bit more, I think, flexibility to do that, especially those that were built offering professional services during the pandemic years, because most companies like mine started without an office. So we're more adaptable to that change. I think what you're finding with small and medium-sized enterprises too is that they're more open to new technologies. They are far more willing, these companies, to engage in the use of artificial intelligence than big enterprises. And not just engage with it, understand it, and utilize it well. So it's a perfect ground for Gen Z to play and feel like they're building something rather than just being a cog in the proverbial machine. Yes.
Brad, thank you so much for an inspirational speech. Question for you about Gen Z.
Yeah.
Noting that their learning has been a different experience than maybe some of the earlier generations that have gone before them. What are you noting around how organizations can support their capacity to develop critical thinking instead of relying on Googling answers, AI to provide solutions? What are you seeing there around how businesses and older generations can support them to develop that critical thinking skill set?
This will sound like lip service, but companies are doing mutual mentoring now, where they're actively engaging younger and older workers together with the intent of knowledge sharing. That's the end result here. So when you place these folks together, either in a formal practice or an informal one, you get natural sharing of information. Younger people might be sharing more about tech, while older adults might be sharing more about process and company culture, which we know is kind of BS, but company culture, how things are done within an enterprise. These have lasting effects for the companies that are doing them well. I think they're especially important. Ginger highlighted this already, but especially for the trades. I think they're absolutely essential because our entire education system, it's hard to think of it this way, but our entire education system is based on a medieval model. We haven't updated our education system in hundreds of years. So we're educating people for a 35-year life, when in reality, they're going to live an 80 or 90 or 100-year life. A mutual mentoring program is a very efficient, very affordable way to make sure that your older workers are getting access to the new skills, but also making sure that that functional structural knowledge is being transferred down to them. One of my favorite examples of this was actually a carpentry in Germany called Brammertz. And one day this 82-year-old man knocked on the door and said, "Do you have work for an old carpenter?" And they kind of, okay, sure, we'll give you a try. And they matched him up with a 16-year-old apprentice. And they became instant friends because they immediately had respect for each other's skills. Now, I'm sure this sounds Pollyanna to some of you, but the reality is it worked because they were both curious at their heart. So if we're looking for those things what are the skills that are really going to pull people, curiosity is a really important part of that. They were curious about each other and the skills that each person had. Will it work for everyone? No, but in this case, the young worker, the guy that was just finishing trade school and entering his apprentice, knew every single piece of new technology, every digital piece of technology for carpentry. The old man, he worked with his hands still, and he showed him how to work with the wood in a way that was, really an old tradition. They were able to harmonize those skills to build a better product, and they were happier and more productive as a result. This is just one example, and one example from overseas, but when it's done right, the data always suggests that it works. What is wrong, though? Well, I'm going to take person A and person B. They might not have any similar interests or backgrounds or whatever, and throw them together and say, good luck. That's not how you manage a program like this in a big enterprise. There does need to be some level of facilitation, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't make those investments. All right. Wow, 2 hours. Thank you for coming. And for those of you who are on the Zoom, thank you for making it today and being part of this event. My email's here if you'd like to follow up with me, please do. I love getting and responding to emails. And thank you, of course, to Ginger and, of course, the entire team at Humber and the often overlooked AV staff and support staff who made this event really possible today. Thanks again.
So please keep on coming. You can also, this has been recorded, it's online, so you can send it to your friends. That virtual link will be up permanently, and we'll bring Badley back for yet to be designed fourth session on something interesting that we will ask our people about and then go from there. But please think about some of these things today that you've learned and value that idea of, this is a college specialty, of course, is work integrated learning. If you want, you can only Google so much, and then you've got to actually figure out how to do it. And that is something that you can really use that type of mentoring approach or multi-generational workforce to get stuff done, because a lot of what we do needs to be done experientially, right? So lots of opportunity. Please talk to us about any type of research that you would like to consider, and we'll see what we can do. So thank you for being here. And there's some snacks and coffee and tea and water and juice. Please feel free to help yourselves. And we hope to see you again.